Okay, so this week we are going to look at the decline and fall of the Roman Empire in the West. And by West, I mean Italy, Spain, Gaul, Britain, and a good part of Western North Africa fell during this particular time. And the date that I have here is a traditional date when really start saying that the end has occurred. That's 476 AD. Okay, and in this slide, I give you various reasons or things that are happening in terms of the fall. So you have a number of different peoples, different tribes of people living in the northern part above the Roman Empire. And every once in a while, these people decide they're going to invade, take some wealth from the Romans, and then move back into their areas. You also have examples of these northern peoples actually sending delegates to the Roman government and asking if they can move their tribes into Roman territory because it's safer, there's more wealth, and so on. And a lot of times the Romans said yes with various conditions. And so you get a mix of both invasions and invitations of these northern people. You also find that in the late 300s, the Romans start having difficult issues with upkeeping their military for various reasons. And what they ended up doing is recruiting from these northern people. And these people would come across, they'd be incorporated into the military, and then they'd rise up in the military ranks just like every other Roman could do. And of course, when they come, they bring their families, they bring their culture, and so on. By the end of the 400s, middle end of the 400s, you have the empire really having lost its west. I say here on the slide it was divided into two, but really what you have is the Eastern Roman Empire, which becomes Byzantium, um, and you've got some territories held in the late 400s by the Romans, where you still have what might be called an emperor or certainly a king. You do get the arrival of the Huns, and I'll show you a map here in just a second. Not quite sure where these people came from, maybe ultimately from China. Not quite sure why they're moving into this particular area in the middle, late 300s. And again, I'll show you the map. You also have these northern people invading into the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And what you end up seeing there is not only battles, but money being given to the barbarians to have them stay out. So they're paid bribes. And of course, you can imagine if you don't have the money to pay the bribe, then you're going to get invaded again. So what you've got here is a map of the Roman Empire in the late 300s. And let me see if I can write on this. So in this area here, even though you can't see it on the map, this is the Huns. So the Huns are starting to move into the far northern parts above the Roman Empire. And here you can see the border of the Roman Empire. And what you've got in this sort of generalized map are a bunch of these tribes of northerners who are living on the border. And in many cases, you've got examples of trade happening, Romans going in, coming back out, these northern peoples coming into the Roman Empire and going back out. So I don't want you to think about it as like a wall built that's a solid wall with no one getting through. Think of it as more porous, where people can go back and forth, goods can go back and forth. What you're going to see is that these Huns keep moving down. And then all these people have nowhere to go except into the Roman Empire. So this is really what's going to start happening here. And the Roman Empire can't handle it. And then, like I said, it pretty much falls in this large area, including North Africa. Okay, some specific examples of what's happening here. So you've got, as I just mentioned, the Huns sort of moving into the northern parts, and you've got all these northern people who are not Roman. They have to move, so they have to get out of the way. They don't want to be captured by the Huns. And so you've got the Visigoths in particular asking an emperor named Valens to move into the Roman Empire. He allowed them in, but part of the condition of coming into the Roman Empire was that they can settle on the border. But if Rome is invaded by anybody, including the Huns, then these Visigoths have to fight for the Romans. That was really the main condition of allowing them in, allowing them to settle, have farms, and so on. Now, there are a couple of examples where you've got these northern peoples coming in with permission to live in Rome, and then Roman generals taking advantage of them, like taking their money, treating them really badly, and they revolt. So you've got what could have been a really good condition of sort of shared boundaries with these two people, protection for Rome, but these generals sort of messed it all up, and then you've got a pretty traumatic thing happening in Rome in 378 with a very famous battle called the Battle of Adrianople, and this caused the death of the emperor. Um, then moving forward about a decade, you've got Emperor Theodosius the First, and I've given you the dates here of when he was ruling, 379 to 395. He allowed them to stay, and then they ended up developing their own kingdoms. The Romans were paying for them, again with the same conditions that they had to fight for Rome if Rome was invaded. And then what you see is this massive movement of people moving towards the west because the Huns are still coming. Another traumatic event happened in 410 with the sack of Rome by one of the Visigoths, who were pretty unhappy. If you know anything about early Christian history, you've got a very famous Christian bishop named Augustine. He wrote a massive work. It's like this thick, published today, called The City of God. And it was written in response because people started saying the empire was invaded by these barbarians because of Christianity. And Augustine wrote The City of God to say, no, it was actually the Christians that helped protect the Roman Empire. And then what you have is these Visigoths being allowed to settle in southwestern Gaul, which is France, part of Germany, and they start their own kingdom, which is the Visigothic kingdom, which extended into Spain. And what they ended up doing is not necessarily destroying what the Romans had built, but they borrow various things from the Romans, like the style of government and so on, except for the king, and created their own kingdom. So here's a map in 420. So again, let me see if I can write on this. You've got the Huns now expanding down into the borders. And again, these people are pushing through. So here you've got the sack of Rome in 410. They go down, they can't go down any further, and they go back into Spain and then set up their own kingdom. Then you've got another group called the Vandals, and they have a pretty interesting history. So a lot of the barbarians who move into Roman territory do not necessarily want to destroy what the Romans built. They want to take it over. They want to sort of mimic what the Romans had, except for the Vandals. And so in 429, you've got a huge number of Vandals sailing from Spain to North Africa, and they make their own kingdom there. They were not Roman friendly at all. In fact, if you look at the title of these people, the Vandals, this is where we get the word vandalize from. So vandalize. They destroyed a lot of Catholic churches, Roman cities, and then set up their own kingdom in North Africa. And then, of course, you've got probably one of the more famous people from late antiquity, Attila the Hun. So the Huns had been in this area for quite a while. We've talked about how they were coming down. And in 440 to 453, you've got Attila controlling a massive amount of territory. And he comes into the northern part of Italy. And you've got a very famous example where Pope Leo I actually pays Attila money to leave. And this is fairly common. Now, the Huns caused a great deal of damage, caused a lot of fear, but they were really held together by the force of personality of Attila. And when he dies, they sort of fall apart, and they're not really a problem so much for the Romans after this. Another group of barbarians that move in are the Franks. So they move into what becomes modern France and Germany. You've got a king named Clovis, and I give you his possible dates here, 45 to 511, who overthrew the Visigothic king. So remember, the Visigoths are the ones who took control of a good part of Spain. And this becomes the Merovingian dynasty, or the Merovingian kingdom. And a little bit later, or a little bit earlier, you've got King Childeric, and we've got some really interesting examples of clothing and different clothing bits. Like this is a belt buckle from about 4 years before King Clovis. It belonged to King Childeric. Um, and so we move up to what's considered to be really the end of the Roman period, 476 AD. So again, let me write on this. You do have a little bit of the Huns up here, but they're not causing too many issues. You've got some other famous groups that will become more famous later. So the Lombards, what they will eventually do is move into northern Italy. We'll talk about Adocer in just a second. You've got the Burgundians, you've got the Franks here, which will play a really big role in history after this particular period with the Frankish kingdom. You also have a group of people called the Saxons, and they and the Angles up here are invading Britain at this time. I'll talk about Britain in just a second. And then you've got the kingdom of the Visigoths here, and then you've got the Vandals down here. So as you can see, there really is no Western Roman Empire. It's been totally taken over. What you do have, though, is the Eastern Roman Empire, which survives. So you still have the Persians out here. The Romans and Persians are going to continue battling. We've talked about that before for quite a while until the Persians fall to the Muslims in the late 500s. Okay, the loss of Britain. Now, sort of ignore the caption titles to this map because that's much earlier than what we're talking about. Um, so poor Britain. So the Britain had been invaded, and we talked about this at the beginning of class, by the Romans in the late 50s BC, and then really started taking hold in the first and second centuries AD. It becomes part of the Roman Empire. Now, when the barbarians started invading in the 300s, what Rome ended up doing is pulling troops out of Britain and bringing them back into the continent to protect their main holdings. We don't know the exact dates of like when the final Romans had left, but it was probably sometime between 410 and 430 AD. And then what this ends up doing is leaving Britain wide open to the Angles and the Saxons we talked about. And you probably have heard the phrase Anglo-Saxon. That's where it's coming from. It's the Angles and the Saxons who then take control of Britain, and then it's lost. Now, we do have still an emperor in the West through all of this mess. This was a man named Romulus Augustus, which is kind of ironic because if you know your early part of Roman history, Romulus was considered to be the person who founded Rome. And then, of course, Augustus, which is part of his title, is the first Roman Empire. So Roman emperor, and he becomes the last Roman emperor in the West, so Romulus Augustus. He was conquered by Doacer, who was an Ostrogoth. So Ostro means east, Visa means west. So the Western Goths, Ostrogoths, are the Eastern Goths. He then declared himself, which is kind of interesting, a king of Italy. So he didn't say he was an emperor, but he was a king, and he probably did this so that the emperor in the east, which we still have, which there's still an emperor there, would not invade and take his territory over. So he pretty much said, "I'm king, and I'll take care of these territories for you." Um, so he was eventually assassinated by a man named Theodoric the Great, who then set up his own kingdom of the Ostrogoths. And there's a whole interesting story to this, which unfortunately we don't have time to go through in this class. And then you've got this map again. So this again is in 476, really at the fall. So you've got the Visigoths, you've got the kingdom of Adoacer, you've got the Burgundians sort of in between, you've got the kingdom of the Franks, you've got Great Britain being lost to the Angles and Saxons, and then you've got the survival of the Eastern Roman Empire. So in the next lecture, what we're going to talk about is Emperor Justinian, who was a Byzantine emperor who attempted to take back and was kind of successful North Africa and Italy, and it was held for a very short period of time.